Taxable, marketing manager at Raffingers and host of Let's Talk Tax. And I welcome you to Neill. Neill is tax partner at Raffingers, and I'll let Neill introduce himself.
Hello, everyone who's listening. Yeah, my name's Neill. As I say, Ashley's hosting the show today. Looks fantastic with the big old bins on. You wouldn't know that she's actually speaking from Delaware in America. She's not even in this country. How technology is advanced.
I wish.
That's a lie, isn't it? But no, yeah, so I'm the tax partner at Raffingers for my sins. I used to work for HMRC for 20 odd years, but I left in 2004. And I'm cute and cuddly now, but I head up the tax department. I deal with things like research and development, problems with HMRC, and generally keeping the team in check. So yeah, I'm the guest on Ashley's show today, and I think you've got some questions for me later, which I'm hoping I'm going to be able to answer.
Definitely. And Neill, your experience, working for HMRC and obviously now as kind of a tax specialist and an accountancy firm, I think you've got a very unique perspective on all things tax. So it'll be great to get this conversation started with your ideas and obviously your experience on both sides of the kind of
for sure.
fight. I won't say fight because it's not really a fight.
I'm going to try and do what you do as well. There's a lot of hand going on. I'm going to sort of talk like that. But anyway.
I always use my hands, very handsy. So just to kick off, obviously today is tax day. So Rishi Sunak very recently released a 17-page document of tax updates that weren't mentioned in the budget earlier on this month. If you could just talk through any of the kind of notable mentions in that document, anything that's worth these guys knowing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm only going to touch on this for 5 minutes because I had this about an hour ago. I read through 17 pages and there isn't anything that's particularly outstanding. But yeah, just a couple of bits to sort of highlight really. There's broadly 3 sections and everything is what was expected. In terms of modernising the tax administration, which is how HMRC look forward. Making tax digital, it applies to VAT at the moment, and they're looking to legislate to actually bring that in for self-assessment from April 2023. I think the original plan was it was going to come in sooner, but things have obviously sort of queered the pitch a little bit with that going on. So that's something to watch out for. Reducing the inheritance tax reporting requirements. Something like 90% of non-tax paying estates are no longer going to have to complete IHT forms. With effect from January 22. Let's have a look. Tax policy announcements. There's going to be a review of business rates, which I think we knew was going to happen. There's also a simplification of land and property VAT rules, which I'm not going to comment any further through risk of putting anyone to sleep. And the last thing is tackling non-compliance. Yeah. Again, this has always been high on HMRC's agenda for many years. They're looking to clamp down on the promoters of tax avoidance, i.e. The people that come up with what they believe are whiz-bang great idea tax schemes to sort of bend the legislation and people don't pay as much tax as they should. And HMRC are actively looking to go after the promoters of such schemes, and they have proposals even to secure or freeze a promoter's assets, so that any penalties that they might be liable for are paid. Right. And again, they're also talking about tackling disguised remuneration tax avoidance. But again, that's been sort of flavour of the month for years. So I think really that was it. We're not talking about any particular changes in tax rates. That's a budget announcement. This is just how they're looking to go forward. Everything was pretty much as expected. So there you go. I'm going to wrap that up.
Thank you. I mean, I know that obviously it literally just came out. So the fact that you had any information on the announcements that were made only an hour or so ago is fantastic. So thank you for that. So let's talk about R&D tax credits. So this is an area that you specialize in. So can we just start by talking through what R&D is and how it kind of works?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So research and development, it's a tax relief that's available for companies, not individuals or partnerships. And if the company carries out research and development activities, have to say that well over 90, probably well over 95% of companies in the UK don't do R&D. If you're a standard business and you just make things in a standard way and sell them, or you sell services, there's every chance you don't do R&D. But research and development, the technical term talks about resolving an issue in the field of science and technology, which helps no one. No one understands what that is. But basically, if you're in a particular business and you need to find a different way of doing something, or if you're designing something either for sale or within your own company, it's possible that you might qualify for research and development. I would suggest that you would want to speak to a specialist to run through what you're doing and then to run through what the qualifying costs might be. So that's a little soundbite on R&D.
And is R&D just for tech companies like web developers and, tech industry companies, or does it, can other businesses in other sectors qualify for R&D?
Absolutely. It's, to be honest, if I've heard that conversation once, I've heard it 100 times. I think a lot of people's idea of R&D is it either has to be a pharmaceutical company that's curing the cold or cancer, or it's a tech company. The amount of people that I've spoken to which are carrying out R&D in their own business and just never realised it. Oh, I thought it was just for techie people. I thought it was just for pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can, I'll just give you an example. For example, building companies and building contractors wouldn't normally be the sort of business that you think, oh, this is R&D.
Sure.
It can be. For example, a couple of years ago, we put in a claim that we've got a building business and they were contracted to go into a shopping centre on the south coast and take the floor out. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And they quoted a price. And they went along on day one at 10 o'clock in the morning with the big drills and started to sort of like hack the floor up. And all the shop owners came running out in this centre and said, you can't do that. No one's going to come in. So they said, oh, okay, we'll come back later. So at 5 or 6 o'clock, when everyone had gone home, they came back with the drills and started hammering away. And environmental services said, we've had like 110 complaints about the noise. You can't be doing this. When are you going to do it? What they had to do was then work out a way of getting this solid concrete floor up without can going in and whatever. And they came up with this sort of innovative way of using like a diamond cutting saw to kind of almost cut it like a cake into sort of swathes and then sort of take it out slice by slice.
Right.
The point is with R&D, if the information as to what you're trying to do is readily available on the internet, or the knowledge is sort of like relatively easy to source, there's every chance it isn't R&D. But funnily enough, even if anyone had done this before, they didn't write a book how to get a floor up in a shopping centre. They had to sit down and puzzle it out, work out how to do it. And basically we put a claim in and HMRC agreed. That's research and development. So that's just, you think of all the building companies that have different projects, where they sit down and sort of scratch their head with a pencil and think, how are we going to do that? That's generally a sort of a pointer that there might be some R&D if it's unusual what you're having to do.
And that's so interesting because there are, I know, businesses in every single sector come up with innovative systems and processes. And as you said, it's not just inventing something new. It can be loads of different things. So we've had a question in. It's from initials AB. They've just said they've done what they consider to be R&D in the drinks industry, developing 2 non-alcoholic spirit recipes. Would they qualify? How would they apply, and what would they be likely to get back? Obviously, I know that's a lot for you to answer without too much information, but does that sound like it could be something that's worth getting in touch with you about?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I'd be honest, if people were putting questions and I just knew it wouldn't be qualifying, I'd sort of hit you with the bad news.
Yeah.
And say, you can phone me anyway and I'll give you a cuddle. But no, it's things like specialist menus, specialist drinks potentially might qualify, and it is worth having a chat about. In terms of the costs, I mean, broadly, there are 3 sorts of costs that qualify for R&D. It's different to what goes in the company's accounts. The rules for that just say if it's for the purpose of the business, you can claim it. With R&D, it's more specific. You're talking about employee costs. So you can have directors and techie people and just normal employees. If they're on a salary and they're undertaking R&D, you can attach a percentage of that salary, and it might be 10, 20, 50% of their salary plus the employer's national insurance, paid pension contributions, can be attached and relate to R&D. There's also something called subcontracted services, where if you go to a person or a company and say, we've got a particular R&D project, we can't quite cope with it ourselves, we want your specialist services, and you pay them, you can claim those costs subject to a particular restriction that's in law, but subcontracted services. And if you're actually consuming any of your materials, which is more in manufacturing, to be honest, rather than sort of techie stuff, you can claim that as well. But no, that I'd be interested in having a conversation with whoever put that question through. Happy to have a chat with you.
Perfect. So they've put their name is Anne. Definitely drop Neill an email. It's neil.staff@raffingers.co.uk. I think it's in the comments, his email address. So definitely drop him an email. Neill deals with the entire process for you. So it's really no stress in terms of that side of things. And Neill's just great to have a chat to anyway, aren't you, Neill? So
absolutely, yeah, whether it hands or whether it's just me, but yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
It's
so
working, having a chat with someone, like a chat.
Definitely. So Neill, obviously, like Anne, how does somebody know if they can qualify for R&D? Is the process complicated, or is there a kind of way that they can figure out if they might qualify? Obviously, you've touched on that in the recent kind of answers that you've just given, but is there a telltale way of knowing, yes, I qualify for this?
I have to say that's a rotten question. So, I mean, how to answer that? I mean, HMRC do offer like a sort of a clearance service where if you're not sure if you're doing R&D, you can actually write to them and say, this is what we're doing. Do you think it qualifies? I'll be honest, I don't use it. And I don't think you would find any of the R&D specialist companies would use it.
Yep.
Because once you've sat down and properly spoken to the tech guys and the directors and actually find out what it is you're doing, you should be able to sort of get a realistic idea as to sort of whether it's R&D or not, to be honest. So if you didn't want to go to a specialist company, I guess you can apply to HMRC and say, I'm doing this, do you think it applies? But to be honest, unless you wanted to take the whole process on yourself,
Yeah,
I wouldn't do that. I would approach an R&D specialist and just say, look, this is my company. I think I'm doing R&D. Are you interested? Any R&D person would at least have a conversation with you.
definitely.
You know, certainly I would. I mean, I've done claims that are ridiculously small that other firms wouldn't take on, just because I think everyone's entitled to get a bite of the cherry, and it's not all about money, to be honest. So I think it's better just to ask someone.
For sure. And at the moment, you've got an 100% qualifying rate, haven't you? So everything that you've put forward, yeah. So I mean, you're definitely what I would call a specialist in this area. So I think if anyone is listening and you do want to find out if you qualify, definitely get in touch. What if somebody has been undertaking R&D for years and hasn't yet made a claim? Are they too late? So say they undertook R&D last year or the year before, does that mean now they can't claim now that they've realised it's possible?
Right. Yeah, again, it's a very good question. There are time limits. In really simple terms, you've got until 2 years from the end of your accounting year to make a claim. So if we said March 19, let's say you've got accounts to 31st March 19, your deadline for actually submitting a claim is 31st March 2021. So you'd be running very close to the wire at the moment. Once the 2-year deadline goes, there isn't any way to get back into earlier years. I've heard people sort of say, oh, you know, what about a claim for overpayments relief, which I'm not going to talk about, but overpayments relief was never designed for that, wouldn't be accepted. It's 2 years after the end of the year. In real simple terms, I am actually looking at a set of March accounts at the moment, which should finish off early next week. The March 19 accounts have already been filed and submitted. Company tax returns gone in, and March 20, I think, has also gone in. So to be honest, we would just go back and literally you can amend the earlier year CT 600 to claim the relief. So you just go back and sort of claim it retrospectively, but the 2-year time limit you have to stick to.
Fine. So for those that thought that they done some R&D 6 years ago and think now
That's
they can
gone.
tap into
Yeah.
this, it's gone. Sorry,
Right.
guys, you've missed your chance. That's great. So before we move on to kind of our next areas, is there anything more on R&D that you think is worth letting people know about?
Only that I have received the email, and I will get back to you after Facebook. It's just landed. Thank you very much, Anne. I'll come back to you on that. Only that it's worth a question. You know, with any decent R&D person wouldn't charge you for just having a chat and having a look. So yeah, when in doubt, ask the question. If you're not doing it, you haven't wasted anything, and always get in touch. To be honest, I do sort of R&D webinars anyway and talk for an hour on R&D, and I don't want to do that because people will go to sleep and turn off. So yeah, there you go.
Definitely. And before we move on to our next kind of area that we're going to go through, we've had a couple of questions in on just some other stuff that I've not got on kind of my agenda to talk through. So we've had a question from Martin, which is, if you have a taxable capital gain as a result of an investment in a property company, will it be subject to tax at the higher rate as if it was a direct investment in property?
Well, there's a question. Could you, let me just see if I can read that, because I'm not sure if you're selling shares or a property. If you have a taxable capital gain as a result of an investment in a property company, will it be subject to tax at a higher rate? Okay, let me answer your question. If you were actually selling property itself, investment property, then yeah, you're taxable at the higher rates of 20 and 28%. Thinking about it, if you're actually selling shares, I'm not sure if that is what you were saying. If you were selling shares, then no, I don't think it's the higher rates. I think it's 20%. Again, if you want to drop me a quick email, I will check that. And just to be clear on your question, you're not selling a property, you're selling shares in a company. I think, again, Ashley, do you just want to quickly throw my email out, Martin? If you just want to email me, I'll get back to you later today and confirm that.
Definitely. And there is another question that has popped in, which is asking for a friend. I am in negotiations for a new role, and the employer has suggested that I can save tax if I bill them through a company rather than being an employee. However, the papers are reporting that I might be caught by IR35. Is this something to worry about?
It's something you need to take professional advice about. Without wandering on this subject too much, HMRC have always been a little bit jumpy about status. So, I mean, for example, I'm employed by the firm and I pay as you earn, and you would think as a tax specialist I could come up with some wheeze to say I was self-employed, I set my own company up, but we don't do it because it's not right. I'm an employee because I turn up and I use the firm's kit, and I turn up for the hours that they want to, and I might choose what work I do on what days, but ultimately I'm an employee and I have holidays and I have sick leave and I have a contract of employment. I couldn't really say that I wasn't. It is a little bit of a whiz. It used to be very popular where people would say, what you do is form a company, we'll bill your company, and when you take it out of your company, take most of it out as dividends, you'll pay less tax. And that was really, really common. And then HMRC got wise to this and started to sort of look at IR35 and sort of how that should work. We've seen all sorts of stuff in the papers about TV presenters that have got their own companies, and some have lost and some have won at tribunal. I would take some advice on that before deciding what you're going to do, is all I'm going to say.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect answer. Again, guys, if you want to ask Neill anything kind of private or anything like that, just drop him an email if you don't want us to talk it through kind of live. So next thing I wanted us to talk through is Let Property campaign. So do you just want to give a quick overview of what the Let Property campaign is, and then I'll talk through some of the questions that we've had in so far on this subject?
Yeah, sure. So Let Property campaign is something that we, again, specialise in. We've done, I think, just over 200 in about the last 4 to 5 years. They've all been accepted. And basically what it is, that there is a hell of a lot of people out there that have got rental income and for whatever reason have never quite got around to telling HMRC about it. Could be that you didn't think there was tax to pay. It could be that people didn't want to pay tax, and anywhere in between. HMRC launched the Let Property campaign really quite a few years ago, and the whole point was they just wanted people to make a disclosure, come clean on their tax, pay whatever tax they owe, subject to whatever expenses they've received, etc., and basically fire up for self-assessment and start to make a return of your rental income going forward. And I have to say, HMRC have been very true to their word, because, as I said, we've done getting on, I think, just over 200 submissions. And the thing I hear commonly from people is, if I put my head above the parapet, it's going to get shot off, surely. I've got to admit that I've had 2 properties for 15 years. They're going to kill me. And I say, no, they're really not. We go through and we prepare accounts for people. We work out the tax, the interest, the penalties. You submit it. And I think HMRC are very good. They'll accept it as long as it looks reasonable and we're not claiming for too much in the way of dodgy expenses or anything. They're particularly pleased if people fire up for self-assessment and they're returning the rental income in future. It's just a really easy way of sleeping at night, to be honest, because the amount of people that I've had on the phone that said, I've been terrified for years, I've just got to do something because I can't sleep at night. And 3 months later, they're all clear. They're a bit lighter at the bank for sure, but you know, they can start sleeping at night. It's a great thing to do.
Definitely. And that brings me to one of the questions that we had in, which is, I've been renting out a property for years and I've never declared rental income. I am so scared that HMRC are going to be after me that I can barely sleep. Am I too late to bring my affairs up to date? And it sounds like you're saying, no, you're not.
No, it's absolutely not. As long as you've kind of got a will to go through the process. Quite often I'm chatting, I sort of say, look, if you're of a nervous disposition, it's the equivalent of getting on a ghost train at the local fair if it was open and not subject to sort of COVID. You know it's going to be scary, but you're not going to lose any limbs. You're going to jump a few times and it's going to terrify you. But when you get off the end, you'll feel quite exhilarated. That's my not particularly good analogy. Basically, HMRC can go back 20 years, okay, if you've failed to make a return of your rental income. And to be clear, when you're doing the disclosure, it's not a case of, well, let's tell them about 6 and see what happens. It isn't a negotiation process. You have to kind of come clean using all the properties, all of the income that you've received. Obviously, as accountants, it's our job to make sure that you're claiming for everything legitimately that you can. And we will prompt you, you know, you've had the property for 20 years. You're honestly saying you haven't put in a new bathroom or a new kitchen. What about, I don't know, the rates, and have you got a managing agent? It's our job to get to the right profit figures. But then you go back and you disclose it. If you've still got the properties, you need to get into self-assessment. We do that for people. We'll do the current return to sort of make sure you're completely clean and sort of send you on your way to sort of carry on doing your own tax returns, or we're here if you want to stay with us. It's a remarkably quick process. 15 years of angst we can turn around probably in about 3 months or less. There will be tax to pay. HMRC will expect you to pay the tax. That's only fair. It's our job to get the tax as low as possible without taking liberties. No, it's never too late to do something like that. Again, I'm always happy to get an email, have a chat with people about it.
And just so we're clear, so for both R&D and the Let Property campaign, if somebody is with another accountant, but they want to come to you specifically on these things, that's more than fine. They don't have to sign up as a client of Raffingers accountancy compliance services to kind of deal with you on this.
No, absolutely. In fact, we have a sort of no poaching professional policy, because it's just not fair on the existing accountant. If someone comes to us for R&D and says, I don't really want to move my accountant, but he doesn't know about R&D, he says, go and have a look about. That's fine. We can literally do the R&D and do everything and then kind of send you back to the accountant to do your accounts next year. In fact, we wouldn't try and poach that person because it would just be wrong. Similarly with Let Property, a lot of accountants who just don't feel comfortable in that arena. You have to really understand the penalty legislation and sort of how the whole thing hangs together. And we can sort of take people, do it, package them off and send them back. That's common. We do that a lot.
Perfect. Neill, is there anything on Let Property that we haven't touched upon before we move on?
No, I think that sort of really covers it. As I said, if anyone's got any queries and thinks, oh, I know a person, or I'm speaking for a friend, not being funny, you can find my number, give me a buzz. I get a lot of calls from withheld numbers who just don't want to give anything on the phone, but I'll speak with them for sort of an hour, talk about the process. It's absolutely fine. You know, always have to have a chat with someone.
Perfect. That is great. Thank you. So next subject that I want to talk through is tax investigation. So everyone's best friend. So say I've fallen subject to a tax inquiry. How do I approach it? What's the best way for me to approach it?
Oh no, what have you done? There's a question. I think the worst thing you can do is if you haven't got an accountant, I think the worst thing you can do is do what I've seen a lot of people do over the years. You get the letter and you panic and you think the first thing you want to do is try and put it right. So you feel compelled to phone the number and speak to the HMRC officer. And you'll find them really polite on the phone. And I'm not decrying HMRC. I was there 20 years. There's a lot of good people there. And it's almost like you want to make friends with them and you start talking and they're encouraging you. And it's the absolute worst thing that you can do because HMRC are never there to be your friends. I know it sounds really dippy, but I've dealt with so many cases where people have landed themselves in all sorts of mess. There's assessments and penalties. And they said, I thought he was really nice when I spoke to him. And he was asking me about where my kids go to school and this and that and what cars I buy. And they think they're being mates. And the inspector's thinking, what a pillock. I know I would if I was still an inspector. The first thing, if you've got an accountant, go speak to your accountant. Even, you know, sort of small one-man band accountants have got a good idea about what an inquiry is. If it's a larger inquiry or you haven't got an accountant, I said, get in touch with someone. As I said, I'll have a chat with anyone and not charge them for sort of half an hour or so, or even a meeting with someone and just look through the letter and you can generally see what HMRC are on about. And as an accountant, the first thing you have to do is trying to work out, is there something wrong? Has HMRC issued the right letters at the right time to the right person? Is it all legal? Are they asking the right questions? Again, sorry, I kind of feel you've started me up now, actually. You've started me up.
No, carry on. This is great.
Again, so I'm not critical of HMRC. I think they actually do a really good job. But once in a while, you get inspectors that push the boundaries, particularly for people that haven't got accountants or accountants that aren't particularly strong. And you get these lists of information. It's like, I think you might have a property. Give me a list of all the properties, when you bought them, how you bought them, what the mortgage was, and etc. And a proportion of those questions are okay. You can ask those. Some of them are not. You can't ask what you did in 2004 and how you bought a property and give me a copy of the mortgage. You just can't. But if you don't know that you can't and your accountant doesn't know, again, I've seen all sorts of people that have turned their world inside out trying to reply to stuff that they really shouldn't have to. And they should have gone to an accountant who just goes back to HMRC and says, this is what you're entitled to. Yeah. Here it is. This you're not. Also, if there is something wrong, accountants are generally like the middlemen between sort of taxpayers and HMRC, because on the one hand, HMRC thinks that the client's done something dreadfully wrong, and maybe the client has done a few things wrong, because a lot of people have. Somewhere in the middle is the accountant sort of brokering the deal and making sure that everything HMRC is okay. And sometimes what the client wants to say to HMRC is like, no, you know, where have you got that big pot of cash? Oh, I keep winning at the horses. It's like, no, don't do that. So it's worth speaking to an accountant. That's what you should do. Don't speak to HMRC. Go and speak to an accountant before you do anything. Just have a chat. As I said, I've had another email in. I've had another email about inquiries. I will get back to you on that. Let me just have a read. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's such a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's such a broad topic in that you can get kind of a letter from HMRC on so many different things, right?
Oh, crumbs, yeah.
But as a general rule of thumb, if I have received that letter and I've come to you, my accountant or an accountant, if I don't have one anyway, and I'm seeking your advice, how involved do you get in the process?
I'm involved in every inquiry. I don't do every letter. We have smaller inquiries. For example, you know, you've had some child benefit and it wasn't added back. We think we're going to amend your return. We think that you've had this. Do you want to confirm? There's not a lot of need for me to get involved in this. You've either had it or you haven't. At the top end of the scale, we deal with inquiries, something called Code of Practice 9, which is where HMRC write out and basically say, we suspect you of serious fraud. If you want to make a disclosure and not go to prison, you can do this. If you don't and we find anything, it's like, God help you. I mean, these are not to be trifled with, and I deal with all of those. We've got getting on for about 10 of those at the moment. Have to be honest about, well, I know for a fact about 90 of these Code of Practice 9 letters have gone into the North London area, part of the Orthodox Jewish community. It's not in any way an anti-Semitic thing from HMRC, but there is a particular...
Oh, we've just frozen Neill. I will just give it a minute for Neill's camera to unfreeze just to make sure that we didn't miss anything. But in the meantime, if anybody's got any questions at all, please feel free to drop them in the comments. We've had a load of emails get sent to us directly, which is great. But again, if you've got any questions that you want Neill to answer, hopefully he comes back to us, because he's still frozen on my screen. I don't know if he looks frozen to all of you. Just let me know if he does. I think we've lost Neill. Okay, I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just to see if Neill manages to jump back on. If he doesn't, I will wrap things up and we will have to go live again next month for you guys to get your answers in. Obviously, as I said, in the comments is Neill's email address, so please feel free to drop him an email and get in touch. We will just arrange to resend Neill the link to see if he comes back. But as it stands, I think this is the issue with working from home. The internet glitches and things happen. So very, very sorry. I think we'll have to wrap that up. I think we're going to have to wrap that up, but I will jump back on in a couple of minutes if we can. So just bear with us. I think Neill might be back, actually. Hold on a moment. Is he back? I think it's glitching. Sorry, guys. I can't seem to get Neill back. So that is probably going to have to be the end of that. As I said, please write us questions in. And thank you for the lovely comments of support. Sorry it ended with a technical glitch. This is obviously out of our control.